Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Discovery Season 5, Episode 7. I believe it's pronounced Erigah. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Discovery, so I'll have to start with the spoiler warning for Discovery up to Season 5, Episode 7. If you have not seen up to this episode, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, I wanted to start this review talking about the Breen. Since this is what this episode covers. So the Breen were first mentioned in Star Trek Next Generation. In fact, it was kind of a running joke whenever someone had to list off like species and make references to other races, that they would say the Breen, yet we've never seen them. It's just something that they mention a lot. I can't remember all the specific references. I know that there was one in was that Hero Worship episode where they thought that another race attacked the starship that was destroyed or damaged, and they thought it might be the Breen because the kid described them as wearing helmets. But it turned out that it wasn't an attack at all. It was just like some anomaly bullshit. And I know they were mentioned. Actually, there was a Season 4 episode where they were mentioned. I can't remember which one I just watched of TNG, where they would just mention, oh yeah, it could be the Breen, or maybe the Breen used this. Oh, you know what it was? It was the Lost. Because Counselor Troy lost her powers. And but at first Data misunderstood and thought that it was a race that she couldn't read, and so Data was listing off all the species that Betazoids can't read, and he said Ferengi and Breen, so apparently Betazoids can't read the Breen. And then the other reference I really remember is from Star Trek Generations, when they went aboard the outpost and Riker was listing off the aliens that use these type of disruptors. He said Romulans, Klingon, or Breen. So they were kind of at first just like a running joke of, oh, this is a race that we mention a lot. But then Deep Space Nine finally decided to show them in the 4th season episode Indiscretion, which I believe is the first time they were seen on screen. And the creators of the Breen look, I think, were on record saying that they were just emulating the Princess Leia's bounty hunter costume from the start of Return of the Jedi, where she shows up in the facade of a bounty hunter to rescue Han Solo. And so, yeah, you will notice a uncanny resemblance, and apparently they did that as kind of homage to it. And in that episode, the Breen were running this prison camp where the survivors of a Cardassian ship carrying Bajorian laborers was captured by them, and Kira and Dukat show up to rescue them, and so they have to fight the Breen, and Kira even puts on an outfit. Now, they were seen again in a DS9 Season 5 episode. Oh, God, was it in Purgatory's Shadow, or was this By Inferno's Light was the sequel? That's right. And there was a Dominion prison camp where they had held prisoners from all over the Alpha Quadrant, and they held a Breen. And there was a part at the end of the episode where they were doing an escape, and the Jim Hadar soldiers came in and discovered they were trying to escape and was going to stop them, but then a Breen shot one in the back. Incidentally, that Breen also got killed by the Jim Hadar, but then there was a Romulan prisoner there who also said there's this Romulan saying, never turn your back on a Breen. And that was referenced in this episode. Commander Rayner actually brought up that saying. And then, of course, the major part of the Breen was when towards the end of the Dominion War, at the end of Season 7, there was a Dominion were kind of losing the war since the Romulans joined, and so they wanted to equal out the odds or even the odds. So they made an alliance with the Breen, and the Breen joined the Dominion in the Dominion War against the Federation Romulans and Klingon alliance. And one of the first acts that the Breen did was to attack Earth, and they destroyed the city of San Francisco. And that is also referenced in this episode when they're saying, oh, you remember the last time the Breen attacked and what happened? And Tilly was saying the last time they came in, they destroyed a city. Unless, of course, they're referencing something else that happened in between the 24th century and the 32nd, but I doubt it. I think they were referencing this. And the Breen had a weapon, a very powerful weapon that could instantly disable ships, but eventually they were able to build a defense to that weapon, and so they were able to win the war against the Breen, and the Breen surrendered when the Dominion surrendered, obviously, because they didn't have their allies anymore, but then they were kind of left alone after that. And they weren't really seen after that, except for Lower Decks. Of course, they made an appearance. That's more modern track, though, but still. And canonically, it was shortly after the Dominion War, where the Breen had taken over the planet Onara that was seen in the Next Generation episode, Symbiosis. And the Breen, there was a brief attack with the Breen where they attacked the Cerritos, but then these automated ships showed up to save the day or whatever. And I think that's all the appearances of the Breen, or at least all the ones I remember. So it's interesting. Sorry, my cat's messing around with my window. Anyway, so in other words, so my main point is that the Breen had not been explored all that much. During this time, we learned little tidbits about them. I talked about this in the previous review, how during the episode Indiscretion, they were said to come from a cold ice polar planet, and that's why they wear the refrigeration suits as outfits to because they are more used to, or they can't live outside a cold environment. And then later during the Dominion War, Wayne, talking to Damar, said that's actually not true, that their planet is quite comfortable. They just but no one knows why they wear those suits. Now, it seems like this episode is kind of taking the middle ground with that, because Culber references like needing to refrigerate him, so that seems to imply that they're used to a colder environment, yet they can survive without their helmets, as we clearly see Locke throughout most of the season not wearing his helmet, so it's not like they need that in order to survive. But so maybe there's a middle ground where maybe Wayne was exaggerating when he said the planet was quite comfortable. Maybe it is a bit on the colder side, but just not cold enough so that they couldn't survive in most humanoids' environment. But anywho, so the point is, we don't know much about the Breen, and this is why I think this is a perfect choice for the main villain for season 5 of Discovery. And I think it's amazing that they're exploring the Breen more, and we get a lot of the political makeup of the Breen, at least in the 32nd century, where there's apparently the main emperor or whatever, and that was holding I think they called it the Imperium, the Breen Imperium, was holding them together, but apparently the emperor fell, and now there's all these factions vying for power, and apparently there's 6 different factions. And they did make reference to this in episode 1 of Discovery, so that was a nice setup. Just casually mentioned that there was a power struggle in the Breen Imperium, which made them really unstable, and that's why they were concerned. But my main point is, they're a much better choice to be main villain in a modern Star Trek show like Discovery than, say, the Klingons. And I think that's what was the failure of Season 1 of Discovery and parts of Season 2, is we already know so much about the Klingons. We know all there is to know, so that means the writers have to thread a needle to stay true to all established canon and lore about the Klingons, and which they kind of did halfway. They did like a half-assed job of it, which alienated a lot of fans. Well, particularly with the Klingons, the worst aspect of it was the makeup change, which was by every account horrendous, and it was the thing fans complained most about, which is why I think the modern track made a real point not to show the Klingons anymore. And then when they finally popped up again in Strange New Worlds, their makeup more closely resembled, and very closely resembled, in my humble opinion, the classic traditional makeup that they've had ever since the TOS movies and the Next Generation. I mean, that makeup is slightly morphed over the years, even between the TOS movies and up to Enterprise. So when Strange New Worlds has it, but it only looks slightly different, like, that is perfectly fine. I have no issues, and I would argue with the people who did have issue with it, because it's close enough. It still has that classic Klingon look. But the Klingon look in Discovery was completely unacceptable, and same with the ones in the J.J. Abrams movies, which I don't consider canon, but they are officially, but whatever. Like, fuck those movies. But yeah, the Klingon look in Discovery, in Season 1 of Discovery, is completely unacceptable. So that's why I don't think we get any... I started to realize there is no mention of the Klingons in 32nd Century. We have no idea what they're up to or what they're doing, and they haven't been involved in anything. And I realized that's probably because they don't want to show that horrible makeup thing from Season 1, because they realized everyone hated it. But on the other hand, they don't want to show them again with different makeup, because then it's the same show, Discovery, so that would be an inconsistent of Season 1 they look like this, and Season 2 they look like that, or Season 5 they look like that. That would be weird. So, I mean, so it was okay for them to do the different makeup in Strange New Worlds, because that's another show, even though Pike and Spock appeared in Season 2 of Discovery and had interactions with the Klingons with the funky makeup, and now we see them in Season 2 of Strange New Worlds having interaction with the Klingons in totally different makeup, but that's more acceptable because it's a different show. It's okay for Strange New Worlds because Strange New Worlds is not Discovery, whereas Discovery, if they had it in the same show, one season looking like that and another season looking totally different, then that would be off. But at the same time, they don't want to go back to that horrible makeup because they know how much people fucking hated it, and rightfully so. So that is just my theory anyway. I have no evidence to that. It's just my guess. But my point is that with the Klingons, they had to thread this needle. They had to, and they did reference like Kalis, but they pronounced it weird, which pissed a lot of people like me off. It's not Kalish, it's Kalis. But they tried to stay true to Klingon mythology and the lore, but they didn't do it 100%, and that just irritated people. And so it's harder to try to jump into a race that's been so established. And I think there is no other alien race that has been as established as the Klingons in Star Trek franchise. Like, even the Vulcans, I don't think have been nearly as established as the Klingons. So you're more likely to rub people the wrong way by fucking with that. Like, even the Romulans hadn't been established all that much, so when Picard fleshed out their species a lot more, that was acceptable. That was fine, because they hadn't really been established at that point. And so that's why I think focusing on the Breen as the main villain in season 5 and fleshing out their whole alien culture and their different, what their society is like, which is what this episode was doing, is the smarter thing to do, because the Breen were a blank slate. They had not been, so you're less likely to bump up against canon and rub people the wrong way. You have a lot more freedom, and in fact, it reminds me a lot of Picard season 1. Which was a mixed bag, but one of the things I did like about that season was their exploration of Romulan culture, and how, because we didn't know all that much about Romulans, even though they were the main adversary for Next Generation, we still didn't know that much about them. All we knew is that the military and the government were very deceitful and like to use espionage and deception tactics, but that doesn't really explore the culture. I just watched the episode Unification, which is the only episode that tried to don't jump into the actual Romulan culture, where we actually meet civilians and everyday people, but even that didn't really explore their culture that much, so we actually got a deeper dive into Picard, which I think was the smart thing to do. And so now Discovery is doing the same thing with the Breen, and I think that's brilliant, and it really sort of it's a great avenue, and it makes me appreciate the season and Discovery a lot more. Now, with all that out of the way, that was a long discussion about the Breen, but I wanted to get that out of the way to talk about how much I like this episode. Because, and the exploration of Breen culture, I think, has a lot to do with why this episode really worked for me, because I think they did a really good job of having this tangible culture and alien race, and they because sometimes Star Trek succeeds in really making an alien race seem real and seem like a real culture. Sometimes they fail, and sometimes it just feels like a throw. Like the Kazon is a good example of failure. So, and it's also interesting that they had this backstory with Commander Raynor, where and I do find it hard to believe that Burnham, or at least Starfleet records, weren't aware of the fact that the Breen had occupied his home world for her. It seems like that's a bit of information that would be rather accessible. But anyway, nonetheless, I thought it was a really interesting addition to the story that had Raynor having this personal history with the Breen, and how that sort of influenced his character. And at first he was like, fuck, I'm destroying, we gotta arm ourselves, we gotta pretend to be sorry, we gotta fight them, blah 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 blah, to the point where the Admiral and the President were just like, get this guy out of the room. He's being annoying. But I liked how that actually led to something that wasn't just Raynor being a dick. There was a reason why he felt that way. And I love the character journey he goes through in this episode, where he eventually does team up with Burnham and uses his knowledge of the Breen against them to do this deception about making them think that they're in contact with another Breen. I can't remember what they're called, the lead faction leaders or whatever, and how, of course, the Breen isn't going to confirm this with the other faction leader because they're adversaries, and he doesn't want to give away any doesn't want to let them know where the Prince or whatever Locke is. They don't want to let them know where he is. And so, and at first they thought, oh, you're bluffing, but they were able to use all this knowledge to be like, oh, we're actually not. And the Breen weren't really going to call their bluff either, because they're not going to destroy the station, because as far as they know, Locke was aboard. Now, when they said, oh, well, we have a ship with the spore drive, so we can just leave instantly like this and you won't be able to catch us, I was thinking to myself, wouldn't the brain guy be like, oh, so that Locke is aboard that ship, so it's okay for us to destroy this Starfleet headquarters? And the other thing is, why is Starfleet headquarters so puny? It looks very tiny and puny compared to this giant brain ship. Now, I realize they're probably just doing that to show, oh, look at how dangerous this ship is, but it makes Starfleet seem insignificant. Now, I know that they were really diminished after the burn, but I got an impression ever since season 3 that they've built up their strength and they've gotten better, but even at the end when those 4 Starfleet ships showed up, they still seemed like they wouldn't be able to take on that brain ship, which again I know is done for kind of plot convenience, but it's still like it makes Starfleet seem a lot weaker than they have been presented in season 4 and 5, in my opinion. But anyway, we had, God, I can never remember her name, but the Vulcan president acting as the president of the Federation in the stead of President Rillick, whatever her name is. Rylick, something like that. I don't know, because she was off on some planet and the Admiral told her to stay there for her own safety, which in other words translates to the actress wasn't available. So they had to write in the Vulcan character as well. But also it makes me think that Doug Jones is no longer available, that he was off doing something else. I don't even know if they still consider him a main cast member. Because when he left this Discovery in episode 2, he appeared in, I think, episode 3 or 4 or something like that, doing and that was episode 3. I think it wasn't episode 4, the weird time stuff. So he appeared in like unconscious in one of those time jumps. So I thought Doug Jones was going to keep showing up in the show, even though Silveru was no longer on Discovery. I thought they would, because episode 3 they had the storyline with him and the Vulcan president and their marriage difficulties, and they haven't touched on that since. So maybe Doug Jones is no longer available, because they mentioned Silveru in this episode, like, oh, he was near Breen Space and he learned this, blah blah blah. But I always thought he should actually be there. Since that's where he was stationed. He was stationed at Starfleet headquarters, and it seems like why this would be the perfect time to include him in Discovery storyline, yet they didn't. So that makes me think that Doug Jones is no longer available, but which is disappointing. But anyway, didn't really affect my enjoyment of this episode. And we see Nan again, yum yum. God, I'll never let that go. God, the season 2 finale had so many flaws. Like, that could have been a really great season. They just fucked it up. But anyway, yum yum. It was just so horrible. But anyway, here we see her again. She pops up again as a security guard guarding Mullen Locke. And I liked her stuff, and I liked how she didn't trust Book at first, which made a lot of sense. She referenced season 4. And at the end, she ended up trusting him, and they teamed up together to get Maul back. So yeah, that stuff was really good. I mean, I don't know if I really buy that Locke wasn't so injured by just that thing being shot once and in the other episode, just because, I mean, this isn't modern day. They have this, super high-tech medical technology in this century, and it seems like that they should have been able to heal him, but apparently the vital organ was hit, but whatever. Anyway, he's in danger, and I think the interactions between Maul and Locke in this episode are really good. Like, at first, and I said this before when they had their other episode, but during the start of the season, they felt like really stupid throwaway bad guys that were going to suck, but they actually did really good with them. They really fleshed out their characters more, and I loved their interactions in this episode. So everything like that really worked for me. Is also get the side plot of Stamets and Adira and Tilly, and at some point Book, trying to solve the mystery of where the next clue is, and eventually they get it. Book uses his empathic abilities, and that was a really cool cinematography. Like, that was a well shot scene when they showed Book, using his empathy powers to look into what's going. I really liked that, enjoyed that. But and I like as I said, I like the Federation negotiating with the Breen. That was really intense. It's interesting now that they're establishing that the Breen actually can speak English. They just choose not to, because at first they're going and then there's a translator that translates what they're saying. But then towards the end, like when they're negotiating with them, and he's like, I will speak your language so there's no miscommunication of what I'm saying. So apparently they choose not to speak their language, which it's not a big deal, but I'm not sure if I like it. Because I don't know, in Deep Space Nine they were going around going rah, 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 and then people could still understand them. Like Wei-Yun and Damar seemed to understand them perfectly. They're like, oh yes, I totally agree. They'll go around going rah, 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 and Wei-Yun would say, oh yes, I totally agree. That's a funny story. So it seems like, what did they speak Breen? It's kind of like the whole Chewbacca thing where he goes rah, and then everyone, or Groot, where he just says I am Groot all the time, but if the other Guardians can understand, oh yeah, don't Groot, don't do that, or whatever. So that's what it seems like with the Breen. But here they're saying that they actually need a translator, and that they can speak English, they just choose not to, or Federation standard, I should say. But anyway, but yeah, that's a very, very minor thing. Overall, yeah, I thought that the negotiations were really tense, and the whole storyline was really exciting. So one little nitpick I have to get to in this episode was towards the end, where Locke died, which I was not expecting. That fucking surprised me. And the Breen were just like, oh, we're going to fucking kill you all. How dare you let him die? And they were trying to be like, no, we tried to save him. But then Maul shows up and starts, not shows up, she was there. Like, they took him to Locke because they knew that he was near death, and she was with him in his final moments. But then she turns around and starts talking to the Breen, saying, oh, the Federation's not being completely honest with you. There's this weapon of great destruction that they're hiding from you. Here's my nitpick with this. As soon as she turned around and started talking to the Breen, beam her the fuck out of there. Like, they've made it clear throughout the entire episode that the number one goal, which is why they didn't want to turn Locke and Maul over to them, because they would tell them about the super weapon, about the progenitor's technology, and they're trying to keep that hidden from the Breen at all costs. Like, they were willing to go to war, they were willing to fight them in order to prevent them from getting this knowledge. And so why are they going to let them be in the same room together? Now, I get having the decency of trying to show Maul their be there for Locke when he dies, but as soon as she turns around and starts talking to the Breen, get her the fuck out of there. Like, that should have been their number one priority, and it was, as they said throughout the episode. So I find it hard to believe that they would just stand there and do nothing as she's telling them all the shit that they purposely, desperately did not want her to tell them. So, no. I don't buy this at all. I think that was my one major issue with the episode. But you know why it happened? So the episode could happen. So the season can happen because it creates an interesting storyline and I like how she convinced them to take her with them, and that her plan, because I didn't realize this, but Burnham spelled it out. Her plan is to get the progenitor's technology and use it to bring Locke back to life. Because apparently that is one of the abilities that this technology has. And they did mention this in previous episodes. I just kind of forgot about it. And so now we have this situation where she's going to use the Breen to try to find this technology. And we know that this is not a good thing. But Burnham, so they decided to let her go, because they realized that if they tried to keep her, then the Breen would attack them, and so they want to avoid that. But they thought, they kind of rather arrogantly, that, well, we're ahead of them because they don't have the last two clues like we do. But what's going to stop them from just following Discovery? I know Discovery has a spore drive, which might make them hard to follow, but surely they could use their funky brain technology to find a way to track them. So, I don't think that was a really smart decision. Book was really against it, but he was against it because for Maul's sake, he didn't want her to be turned over to the Breen. It was interesting when she showed those matching tattoos that meant that they were married, and so technically that she should be welcomed, and then they're like, oh, you're an outsider, this is a disgrace, you'll never be accepted. But eventually, once she convinced him, hey, there's this super technology I'll get for you, all right. So yeah, it was a really intense episode. I think it did a really good job of building suspense. I think I'm starting to care more about these characters of Discovery than I ever had in any other season. I get more invested in Book and Michael Burnham. So I think that this season is turning, especially Commander Raynor was such a great addition to the cast. So I think this season's turning out to be probably the best season, if they can land this ending. Hopefully they can. Hopefully they don't do a Picard season 3 and fuck it all up in the final 2 episodes, but I'm really hopeful that they will, because so far I've been really impressed with this season. So anyway, my rating for this episode out of 10, it's going to be a 9, excellent. And this is, maybe I'm being overzealous again. I could really foresee in the future going back and watching this episode again and being like, it's not a 9, maybe an 8. It would fit it more. And I was thinking about giving this episode an 8, but I think there's so much about it I liked. There was nothing that really bothered me, except for the whole thing with letting Maul spill the secret. But that was, other than that, the whole story was really smooth, and I was really invested in the characters, and I love how they did all this world building with the Breen. So overall, I really liked this episode, and I'm really liking season 5 of Discovery. So yeah, I was actually, I'll be honest, I'm surprised that I'm this impressed with Discovery, and it does make me one thing I was thinking of after I watched this episode, it makes me kind of sad that Discovery is ending, which before I didn't really care and thought it was a good thing, but I think this is an Enterprise situation where the show has finally hit its stride. The show has finally got good. So I thought it would happen in Season 3, but Season 3 was a bit of a disaster, but Season 4 was a vast improvement, and Season 5 I think is turning out to be even better than Season 4. So the show is hitting its stride and is getting canceled and cut off right when it was getting really good. But on the other hand, maybe it's a good thing to go out on a high note and not wait till you decline again, like shows like Breaking Bad has done, so they don't end up like shows like Lost or Game of Thrones that have terrible endings. You go out on a high note right when you're good. So maybe it's a good thing after all. But it does make me wonder how great the next seasons could have been if the show keeps getting better like this. But anyway, season's not over yet. I could be eating my words by the end of the season, but I doubt it. But anyway, that is it for my review of this latest episode of Discovery. I shall be back next week, of course, to continue to cover Discovery, and I'm currently covering every episode of Star Trek, currently in the 4th season of The Next Generation, so you can check that out on my channel. Be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.